The calf was still breathing. That was the only reason anyone stopped to look twice. She was 3 days old, folded into the mud at the base of a fence line on the coal ranch, 40 minutes outside Cody, Wyoming, in the shadow of the Absaroka Range. Her back left leg was torn open below the hock, tangled the night before in a snarl of barbed wire that should have been replaced 2 winters earlier. Nobody had seen it happen. By the time Emmett Cole found her at first light, the wound had been open for at least 12 hours, maybe more, and the flies had already found it. By the second morning, the wound was moving, not bleeding, moving. A shifting gray-white mass packed into the torn tissue, thousands of blowfly larvae working the wound in a slow, wet churn that turned Emmett's stomach the first time he crouched down to look. The smell was worse than the sight. Sweet and rotten, the smell every rancher learns to associate with one outcome. The vet came out at 9. Dr. Renata Voss, 22 years in large animal practice in Park County, not a woman who scares easy or sugarcoats a diagnosis. She knelt beside the calf for less than a minute. "That's a lost cause, Emmett, I'm sorry. With a wound that size, that infected, that many maggots, the tissue damage alone is going to be catastrophic, and if it's not already septic, it will be by tonight. The kindest thing you can do is put her down before she suffers through it." Emmett didn't say anything. He'd heard that sentence before. He'd said it himself, more than once, in 30 years of ranching in wolf country. But he didn't reach for the rifle. To understand why, you have to understand what Emmett Cole watched happen to this land over the last 3 decades, because Emmett is one of a shrinking number of ranchers who remembers what this country looked like before the wolves came back, and what it turned into after, and most of his neighbors have already forgotten the difference. Wolves were gone from the Yellowstone region by 1926, hunted and poisoned into extinction as a matter of federal policy. For almost 70 years, the ecosystem ran without its top predator. And in that vacuum, something else moved in and multiplied unchecked: coyotes. By the time Emmett bought his first parcel of land in 1978, coyotes were everywhere. Not the occasional lone animal slipping along a tree line. Packs of them, bold, working in numbers, and for a cattle operation, coyotes are not a curiosity. They are the single greatest threat to a newborn or weakened calf in that part of Wyoming. A healthy adult cow can defend herself. A 3-day-old calf lying immobile in the mud with an open wound cannot. Ranchers lost calves to coyotes every single spring. It was priced into the business, the way weather was priced into the business. You budgeted for it. Then, in January 1995, wildlife biologists released 14 gray wolves into Yellowstone National Park, 40 miles from where Emmett was standing right now. Everyone in Park County had an opinion about it. Most of them were furious. Wolves meant dead livestock, dead pets. A war with the federal government over land ranchers had worked for generations. Emmett was furious, too, for the first few years. But something happened that nobody predicted with the level of clarity it actually played out. The coyotes started disappearing. Not because the wolves were hunting them for food. Coyotes aren't a wolf's preferred prey. They're too small to be worth the energy most of the time. Wolves kill coyotes for a different reason entirely: territory. Coyotes compete with wolves for the same small and medium prey, den in the same terrain, and a wolf pack treats a coyote the way a rancher treats a fence-crawling dog on his property: not tolerated. Wolves chase coyotes out of their territory, and when a coyote doesn't leave fast enough, wolves kill it. Wildlife researchers tracking the Yellowstone ecosystem after 1995 documented it precisely. In the years following wolf reintroduction, coyote populations inside wolf territories dropped by as much as 50%. Coyote pack sizes shrank. Coyote territories contracted into the gaps between wolf pack boundaries, the leftover ground the wolves didn't want. It's a well-documented phenomenon in wildlife ecology called mesopredator release in reverse. When you bring the top predator back, the smaller, more numerous predator underneath it gets suppressed. It wasn't just Yellowstone's interior. Park County's own extension office kept informal predator loss records through the co-op for decades, and the numbers, when Emmett finally sat down and compared them one winter, told the same story from a different angle. In the 15 years before wolves returned, the average reported coyote-related calf loss across wolf-free ranches in the county ran close to 4% of a spring calf crop. On ranches that later found themselves inside an active wolf territory, that number fell to under 1% within a decade of a pack denning nearby. Not because anyone changed how they guarded their herds, but because the animal doing the guarding had changed. Emmett didn't read that in a journal first. He watched it happen on his own ground, one spring at a time, for almost 30 years. Fewer coyote tracks in the snow, fewer nights woken up by that particular yipping chorus half a mile off. Fewer calves lost in April. He mentioned it to other ranchers at the co-op for years, and mostly got the same response. A shrug or an argument about how many cattle wolves themselves had killed that season, which, in raw numbers, was true. Wolves do take livestock sometimes. But nobody was tallying the other side of the ledger. Nobody was counting the calves the coyotes didn't get, because you can't count something that didn't happen. Absence doesn't show up in a loss report. Emmett counted it anyway, in his head, every spring, for years. So when a wolf pack denned 2 ridgelines over from his property in the spring of this year, a female wearing a GPS research collar out of the Wyoming Game and Fish Monitoring Program, tag number known to every biologist in the region, Emmett didn't panic the way his neighbors did. He watched. For the first 4 days after Dr. Voss recommended putting the calf down, Emmett didn't touch her. He didn't clean the wound. He didn't apply anything. Linda, his wife of 31 years, watched him carry water and colostrum replacer out to the small pen he'd built beside the equipment shed, and said the thing every rancher's spouse eventually says to a decision they don't understand yet. "Emmett," the vet said. "I heard what the vet said. Those maggots are going to kill that calf." Emmett set the bucket down. "They're not going to kill her. They're the only reason she's still alive." What Emmett understood, and what a lot of large animal vets in a rushed field visit sometimes miss or don't have time to explain, is that not all maggots on a wound are the same maggots doing the same thing. Blowfly larvae feeding on a wound will consume necrotic tissue, the dead and dying flesh around an injury, before they touch anything living. It's not folk knowledge, it's a documented medical mechanism called debridement, and larvae from species like Lucilia sericata are precise enough about it that hospitals use sterile medical-grade versions of the exact same insect on human patients on purpose to clean wounds that won't heal any other way. It's called maggot debridement therapy. The FDA cleared it as a medical device in 2004. Surgeons in modern hospitals in Los Angeles and London use it on diabetic ulcers and post-surgical wounds today, for the same reason Emmett Cole's grandfather's generation of ranchers used to leave a fly-blown wound alone rather than scrub it out with carbolic acid. The maggots eat the dead tissue, they secrete compounds with antimicrobial properties, and they leave the living tissue underneath essentially untouched. What looked to Dr. Voss like a catastrophic decaying wound crawling with the evidence of a losing battle was, underneath the surface horror of it, an open wound, being systematically cleaned by the only tool available in that pen that could do it precisely enough not to cause more damage. The maggots weren't consuming the calf. They were consuming what was already dead, one cell layer at a time, and leaving the rest alone. That didn't mean the calf was safe. Infection was still a real risk. Sepsis was still on the table. Emmett wasn't gambling on the maggots alone. He flushed the wound with saline twice a day. He kept her hydrated. He watched her temperature like a man watching a gauge on machinery that could fail without warning. But he didn't reach for the rifle, and he didn't let anyone else reach for it either. By day 6, the wound had stopped smelling like rot and started smelling like something closer to raw meat, a smaller, harder, cleaner kind of ugly. The maggots had finished their work and mostly moved on or died off. Underneath them was live tissue, pink at the edges, starting, barely, but starting, to close. Dr. Voss came back out on day 9, expecting to write a death certificate. She left without one. "I don't know what to tell you, Emmett. I've never seen a wound that looked that bad turn around this clean. You got lucky." Wasn't luck, Emmett said. Just didn't get in the way. The calf was going to live. That much was becoming clear by the second week. But she still couldn't stand for more than a few minutes at a time, couldn't keep pace with the herd, couldn't defend herself from anything that came looking for an easy meal in the dark. And that spring, something was coming looking, on nights when the wind was right and the smell of a healing wound carried across open country the way it always does. Emmett heard the pack for the first time on a Tuesday night in late April. Not a movie sound, no dramatic extended howl. Short, layered calls back and forth from the ridge 2 properties over, the den site the biologists had flagged that same collared female too. Linda came into the kitchen at 11 at night and found Emmett standing at the window with the porch light off. "That's wolves, Emmett." "I know. That calf is out there half crippled and you've got wolves denned 2 miles from your fence line." Emmett didn't move from the window. "Coyotes were denned a quarter mile from that fence line every spring for 25 years, Linda. I never once slept easy about that." He was right to be calm, though it took another 3 weeks for the reason why to become undeniable. His neighbor to the east, a younger rancher named Trey Iverson who'd taken over his father's operation 4 years earlier, lost 2 calves to coyotes that same month, a normal, expected, budgeted for kind of loss on a ranch that didn't happen to sit inside wolf territory. The second one happened on a Sunday morning, and Trey found what was left of it himself before church, in a low draw 200 yards from the house. Tracks in the soft dirt around the carcass told the story plainly enough. Not one animal, 3 or 4 working together, in and out fast, the pattern of a coyote pack that knows exactly how long it has before a rancher with a rifle shows up. Trey stood over it for a long minute, the way every rancher does at least once in a career, doing the math on what that calf would have brought at the fall sale and what it cost him to lose it before it ever got there. He didn't call it bad luck. He'd budgeted for a loss like this every year of his life. It just happened to be the same spring his neighbor lost nothing at all. Emmett lost none. Not because the wolves were protecting his stock out of some sentimental instinct. Wolves are not guard dogs, and nobody serious about wildlife biology would tell you otherwise. But because a wolf pack denning nearby means a wolf pack actively patrolling and defending that territory against every smaller predator that would otherwise use it. And coyotes are exactly the animal a wolf pack drives out first and hardest. The coyotes that had picked off calves on Emmett's property every spring for a quarter century simply weren't there that year. They'd been pushed off the ground by something bigger that wanted it more, the same way they'd been pushed off Emmett's ground once before, back in the years right after 1995, before the memory faded and the pattern got written off as coincidence. The trail camera Emmett had mounted on a post near the equipment shed, more out of curiosity than anything else, caught the collared female twice in May, moving along the tree line at the edge of his property at last light, alone, unhurried, in no apparent hurry to come anywhere near the pen. She wasn't hunting the calf, she was patrolling a boundary, and the calf happened to be standing on the safe side of it. By June, the calf, Emmett named her Raina after nobody in particular, just a name he liked the sound of, was walking the pasture on a leg that had healed into a permanent, faint hitch in her stride, but held her weight just fine. She'd survived a wound the vet had called unsurvivable, using a process most people find too disturbing to look at directly, protected in the weeks that mattered most, not by a fence or a rifle, but by the presence of the one predator everyone in that county had spent 30 years being afraid of. Trey Iverson drove over in July the way Blake had driven over on another ranch in another story to ask the question every skeptical neighbor eventually asks. "You're not scared having wolves denned that close to your herd?" Emmett was leaning on the same fence Raina had been found tangled in, now replaced, smooth wire, no rust. "I was scared of coyotes for 25 years and never thought twice about it because everybody's scared of coyotes. Wolves show up and suddenly everybody wants to talk about danger." He nodded toward the ridge. "You lost 2 calves this spring. I lost none. Only difference between your ground and mine is what's denning on it." Trey didn't have an answer for that. Most people don't, the first time the math gets put in front of them plainly. Raina is a yearling now. She still favors that back leg slightly, a hitch you'd only notice if you knew to look for it. The wound closed into a scar the size of a silver dollar, hair growing thin and white around the edges where the skin healed over. Dr. Voss still brings students out to Emmett's ranch sometimes when the timing works, just to tell them the story of the calf she was certain wouldn't survive the week. The wolf pack is still denned 2 ridgelines over. Emmett still hasn't lost a calf to a coyote in 3 years running. The math isn't sentimental and it isn't magic. It's a predictable, documented consequence of what happens when you put the right animal back on a piece of ground it used to belong to and let it do the only job it's ever known how to do. Nature didn't remove the danger from that pasture. It just reorganized who was in charge of it. Linda still isn't entirely comfortable with it even now. She'll tell you that herself, if you ask her straight. There's a difference, she says, between understanding a thing and feeling easy about it, and 31 years married to Emmett Cole has taught her that those two things don't always arrive together or on the same schedule. She still counts the herd twice some mornings out of habit, the way she did for 25 years when coyotes were the thing to count against. But she stopped watching the ridge the way she used to watch it that first spring, and she's the one who suggested the name Raina in the first place, before Emmett had even decided the calf was going to make it. Some knowledge you arrive at slowly, in a kitchen, watching your husband stand at a dark window, deciding whether to trust something everyone around you has spent a generation being afraid of. And on quiet nights, when the wind comes down off the Absarokas the right way, Emmett still stands at that window with the porch light off and listens to the sound his grandfather's generation spent 70 years without hearing, and thinks the same thing every time. The land was never broken. We just forgot who used to run it.